What is going on YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the debut album by R&B singer Eamon. Basically, this project is called I Don't Want You Back, and it came out in the winter of 2004. Now, the thing about this particular album is it had a huge hit single on here that was a big staple in like VH1 and MTV and that type of stuff, and that was the hit song Fuck It, I Don't Want You Back, which particularly just did a lot of damage. It was kind of like a doo-wop kind of R&B song that was just pretty different for the time, but I do remember hearing it back in the day, like 20 years ago, and it's just kind of the concept about it. It was just a pretty stellar kind of hit, but I always wondered what happened to Eamon afterward. He just had this one song, and the second single didn't really pick up much steam. I always kind of wondered back in the day what the second single was, and it's I Love Them Hoes, Ho-wop, and it's definitely a pretty interesting one. I can see it not having like the chartability factor about it, but maybe it did chart on like, maybe it did get some spins on like MTV2 and places like that, just lesser known television channels as far as that kind of went, but it didn't chart in the United States. It was just kind of one. It did chart a little bit in Europe and places like that, Europe and Australia. It did chart in places like Europe and Australia and other international kind of places, but it's just too bad that it didn't chart in America because it's a pretty decent bop. I mean, it just doesn't have the crestability and overall affable kind of marketability of Fuck It, I Don't Want You Back, but it's definitely a pretty good one to kind of have just within that sense. So I would have to say I like this album, but it's just a very starch kind of project. I just would have to say that's kind of the thing about it is it just really it combines like hip hop, R&B, and doo wop sound, which doo wop is kind of a subgenre that generated out of like the 1950s and maybe early 60s stuff like that. It's just interesting because I could. This is kind of an East Coast album. This is kind of an East Coast album, so this is the sort of stuff that just feels more New York, Philadelphia, Boston bound, some of those type places, just further up on the East Coast, especially in the winter. I would have to say this just reminds me of like city buildings, skyscrapers, that type of stuff, and like this months between like late October and like the first half of March. I would have to say it's just something that reminds me for that sort of sense. So if you do live on the East Coast, especially around this time of year, which I'm reviewing this in November, I would have to say the concept about it is this is a pretty good bop to kind of have for like some cooler weather and just appreciating the cityscaping and that type of stuff. But nonetheless, the project is pretty stark in just kind of its production work. It doesn't really have like glaringly like this gravity defying beats on here. I would have to say the concept about it does have some decent bops on here, but it's just kind of somewhat humdrum just in the sense of the approach of how it goes. I would say that Fuck It and Low Rider are probably the two best beats on this album. It's not to say that this is a horrible project. It just has a lot of kind of basic and just overall kind of plain and almost trite productions that kind of bogged down this project. I kind of felt like back in the day I used to see that Eamon had a lot of similar. Back in the day I used to think that Eamon had a lot of similarities to Akon. I both thought that they were only going to be here for one album. Now Eamon did drop a second album, but it just didn't chart at all with this with the first single and that type of stuff. Akon got a lot further, but I just kind of they had like similar approaches. They both have a pretty high pitched voice, and they both have some pretty good 2000s era R&B type tunes as far as that kind of goes. It's definitely some good stuff. I would say that this is a decent album. It's probably about middle of the road, but I kind of look after it. It still has some good singing on here and good overall approaches. I do think that Eamon has character, so I do think this is a good album out of the 2000s, but it does have some weaknesses about it that we'll get to as the review progresses. But I'm just going to go ahead and talk about the singles. There were two brief ones, and basically the first single was Fuck It, I Don't Want You Back. So it's what the album is named after. Kind of almost, I mean, in some cases, I can see folks saying that Eamon, I mean, it makes sense to say that Eamon was kind of a one hit wonder. I mean, he does have other hits on this album, but in terms of like sheer kind of commercial crestability, this is about the only song that really happens on here is Fuck It, I Don't Want You Back. Pretty good song on here. This is a dreary kind of city night commerce tune. I would have to say it's some good frosty weather music, and this is some good frosty weather and makeshift traverse. I would have to say so. It's just an overall nice one. This definitely reminds me of like a cool breeze kind of New York weather kind of tune, just especially in like the fall and winter as far as that kind of goes. Just some good cityscaping to kind of have. I mean, I can see this being played in other places, but it just doesn't quite feel as much in character listening to it out in California or on the Midwest or some of those places. It just feels a lot more just with skyscrapers, kind of closer to like the Big Apple and some of those type places. But I definitely like the concept of it. This really kind of feels like you're just walking up the city street, something like that, with like a coat on, something like that, smoking a stogie, some of those type moments. maybe getting ready to get a taxi, something like that. Just a good, nice appeal about it. It has some great melodies on here. This is a very catchy and affable song. Great chorus, just great memorable chorus as far as that kind of goes. Just really has some melodies that just work pretty well. It's just a marketable and affable song, but it kind of was just so good to the point that I just feel like the context of this particular song, just the concept of just the topic as far as it kind of went, just being a breakup kind of song as far as that kind of goes, just kind of having like some problems and just kind of similar to JoJo's Get Out right now, if you know JoJo. Kind of similar to JoJo's Get Out song, if you know the singer chick JoJo, I would have to say. But it just kind of has the concept. It's just kind of a tricky one to follow up just because this is so memorable. And Eamon is in just such a bad mood on the song. I just kind of felt like it's almost parody like as far as that kind of goes, just because it's just such a. This is just kind of like a karaoke song that you would play, just being in a foul mood, just being like, fuck you, and that sort of stuff. I just kind of look after it, just being able to say that it has a good context, but it just seemed like it was a very tricky. I just kind of felt like it was a very tricky song to follow up in terms of like the affability behind it. So it's just another of those songs that just kind of has like some kind of affable, kind of like this quotable, this mentality about it that just is real easy to recite. But then the second single just doesn't deliver as much. But I like the second single. We'll get to that. So the second single is I Love Them Hoes, Ho-Wop, and this is definitely a pretty nice one, although I can see it not being quite as much of a charting hit. It didn't really chart at all in the United States. I Love Them Hoes is kind of a brisk, city-stepping day commerce tune, I would have to say. It's almost Broadway-like. It has almost Broadway-like feels about it, and it's just some peppy R&B makeshift, I would have to say. So this one does have a nice appeal about it. Definitely does feel like something Broadway like, something just in like those kind of more fancy and more Blue Blood-esque type places in like New York and some of those East Coast type places as far as that kind of goes. But I look after it, it definitely reminds me of some good day commerce where fuck it, I don't want you back is kind of more dreary night fare, just getting into a taxi drunk, some of that type stuff. Just kind of dreary after hours. But I would have to say that I Love Them Hoes. This really feels like a Broadway play, something like that. This really has like a lot of pep towards it. Feels like something that like East Coast rappers would kind of do in that sort of sense. Kind of feels like something East Coast rappers would do in that sort of sense. Just a good concept about it. It's a real good city stepping day commerce tune that just works extremely well. So that one's a good one. But the problem with it, it just doesn't quite have the affable hook as far as that's kind of concerned. I think it's catchy, and the problem with this song is I just don't think this song is quite as catchy as "Fuck It, I Don't Want You Back." It just doesn't quite have the distinct and just kind of marketable kind of chorus. Although I do think it's pretty funny. I think it's definitely a pretty funny one to kind of have, and just has a lot of charm and personality towards it. It just doesn't ring true quite as well. It's just one of those ones, and it's just too bad that they just didn't really give Eamon many shots to kind of shine and have some more. It just sucked that they didn't give Eamon more time to shine and have some more time in the limelight, because I definitely think he had some personality on here. It's just kind of the fact that this one just kind of feels a lot more pedestrian, but I still look after it. It's a good song, but it just doesn't have like the ubiquitous feel of "Fuck It, I Don't Want You Back," and it's just too bad. I mean, I do feel like with it being called I Love Them Hoes, it kind of is the same concept, although both these songs are kind of profane. I kind of look after it's just kind of the concept that I don't know. They just didn't really give Eamon much of a chance, which is too bad because this is a good song. But I just look after it that it just didn't quite have like the marketability quite as surely. It's I think it's crafted, but it just didn't quite hit the nail on the head. But you know, I still recommend it. So there's 15 songs on this album, and minus the intro, there's 14 songs. And out of those 14 songs, I wound up recommending to you 7. So I'll go ahead and recommend those 7 songs. So they would be "Fuck It, I Don't Want You Back," "I Love Them Hoes, Ho-Wop," "I'd Rather Fuck With You," "Low Rida," "Get Off My Dick," "Girl Act Right," and "Finally." So talk about some of these. Like a real good song on here that's just an immediate highlight is the reimagining of a real good highlight to go for that has a lot of flair is the reimagining of the NWA song "I'd Rather Fuck With You." This is one that was on NWA's. I want to say it's either I don't remember which album it's on, either "Niggas for Life" or "Straight Outta Compton." I don't remember which one it's on, but it's on one of those. But it's definitely a pretty good bop. Eazy-E took care of that one pretty well. But this one is just a good reimagining of an NWA song. I would definitely have to say it's some nice dreary R&B sleaze, definitely, and it just has like appealing gloss about it. So this is one where Eamon just basically does the Eazy-E singing that he did on that particular song and just nails it. It's just really affable. Just has a good charm about it. And just really works as like a sardonic kind of just sleazy kind of tune as far as that kind of goes, just within the concept of just being a good bop to kind of have. So that's a nice one. A real nice beat on here is "Low Rida." A real nice tune on here is Low Rider. This is a glaring, chilly nightclub tune. I would have to say it's got some dramatic city commerce feels about it, and it's one of the project's better beats, definitely, but it's pretty dim. So I just would have to say this is definitely a dramatic type song. I would have to say the city commerce is just really good. This would almost be like a pretty rickety kind of nightclub tune, but I kind of feel like it just reminds me of something that this is a more dramatic night as far as just kind of overcast kind of weather almost. It's a real chilly weather kind of one as far as that kind of goes. Just the concept of just like the typical drama of being on the East Coast, some of that type of stuff as far as that kind of goes. But it's just kind of one that just has a real imposing and emphatic kind of feel about it. And Nori is on here, which is a pretty good fit. He's Nori, the rapper, is on here, which is a pretty good fit. He's really like the only guest on here apart from like this cat named Milk D. But apart from that, this is pretty good bop to kind of have. It's just a good kind of emphasis of one that just really feels like a kind of this menacing kind of chilly weather kind of nightclub tune just for kind of night commerce as far as that goes. For some night commerce as far as that goes. So it's definitely a pretty good one. Girl Act Right is a pretty good one on here. This is a dramatic kind of bickering evening out tune. I would have to say it has a spicy feel about it, and it's just a dope. It has some dope, busy, and bustling kind of vibes about it. So this is just one where it just kind of feels a little bit frenetic, that type of stuff. Just a dramatic kind of bickering kind of night as far as that kind of goes. Just this one just kind of feels like a frenetic kind of bickering date night as far as that kind of goes. Just kind of one that's just all over the place and just kind of has like some back and forth as far as that kind of goes. Just kind of the standard drama of just like an easy kind of night out with some chicas and that type of stuff as far as that kind of goes. Just a good one, but it kind of is a little bit of a tense song. I kind of feel like Eamon's more kind of annoyed in the song than what it would standardly kind of feel like. It's kind of similar. Like Eamon kind of has like some degree of nihilism on here. I kind of like the concept of it. He has a pretty affable character, but it's just kind of the concept that maybe I'd almost question if it had been toned down like a notch or two, it probably would have charted better. I just kind of think it's not quite bitter, but it's almost salty, I would have to say. It's just kind of, there's some salty songs on here. It's just kind of the concept about it. But I look after it, it is pretty good bop on here, but it's kind of one for like a kind of spicy kind of date night, I would have to say. But in some cases, the energy of the song is a little bit more angry than probably the concept of it. But that's still the thing about it. But Finally is a nice one. Finally is a pretty good one on here. This is a dreary kind of day after hours relaxation, I would have to say. It's definitely a sip some good drink tune, I would have to say. And it's just this Finally song is not an out and about tune, but it's a mood. I just would have to say this is a good mood of a song right here. It's just kind of one for some R&R and that type of stuff. Just kind of sipping some good drink, something like that, kicking back, having your slippers on, something like that, just in the cooler weather, just the heat's on, that type of stuff. Just some good stuff to kind of kick back with and just have a good time. Definitely would have to say it's just a lounge kind of song. And then Get Off My Dick is a pretty nice one. And then Get Off My Dick is a pretty nice one. This is a similar type tune to Don't Want You Back, I would have to say. It's just a real drowsy kind of city commerce bop, I would have to say, and it just has some everyday feel about it. So this is kind of one, it's a really kind of sleepy, kind of drowsy one, like most of the production on this particular album. This one kind of feels more R&B, though, than doo-wop, but this is very, like I was saying, just very drowsy and just kind of just sluggish, I would have to say. It's pretty, like, I like definitely the beat on Fuck It, I Don't Want You Back is one of the best ones on here, but that one's just kind of a little bit more city stepping throughout the night lights and that type of stuff. I would have to say that Get Off My Dick just reminds me of something that you'd listen to in like a taxi or just like cartoon, something like that, just a warm vehicle, something like that in the winter, something. Get Off My Dick just reminds me of like a sleepy kind of sluggish drive across the city and that type of stuff. This kind of easy kind of cruise music just in like evening and night commerce as far as that kind of goes. So it's just a good one to kind of have. But it just has a similar facet. If you really like the energy and overall ambience and vibe of Fuck It, I Don't Want. If you really like the ambience and energy and vibe of Fuck It, I Don't Want You Back, I would say that Get Off My Dick is a very similar type one in like the cadence and just overall approach of how that one kind of happens. There's a number of songs that are kind of like that, but this is definitely one of the most marketable ones that kind of does it just within that sense. So it's just a good one, has that same kind of this bravado type tune. It's definitely kind of a more, Get Off My Dick is definitely kind of more of like a bravado type tune, I would have to say. It's a pretty good one for that. So that's just kind of the concept about it. So I look after these songs. There's some good ones on here. I would have to say that Fuck It, I Don't Want You Back and Get Off My Dick are two. I would say that Fuck It, I Don't Want You Back and Get Off My Dick are two similar type tunes just for cityscaping and that type of stuff. Finally is kind of a relaxation tune. Girl Act Right is kind of like a spicy kind of date night tune. Low Ride is kind of like a dramatic kind of leaving the nightclub and just kind of city traverse kind of. Lowriders just kind of leaving a nightclub, city traverse kind of dramatic type tune. I would say I Love Them Hoes is like a day commerce. I would say I Love Them Hoes is like a day commerce kind of bop just for like some makeshift during the daytime. And I would say I'd rather fuck with you is just kind of like a good kind of emphatic kind of just evening kind of after hours kind of tune for the ladies as far as that kind of goes. I just would definitely have to say. So it's kind of the concept about it. But so to talk about some of the songs I didn't enjoy on here, basically the other 7 songs I didn't recommend. There's just a lot of these that just kind of have some poor productions on here and just were not very engaging at all. I kind of look after the concept about some of these. There's like a string of poor songs on here, like My Baby's Lost, I Want You So Bad for the Rest of Your Life, All Over Love and Controversy. Some of those type ones that just have some really poor and plain productions and are just pretty dull overall. Just don't really jump off the page. They just really feel like plain and they barely feel like they should be on like an album that should be released in stores as far as that kind of goes. These are just, I mean, these are just kind of pedestrian and just overall kind of almost cruddy kind of beats on here that just really kind of don't feel that marketable in terms of affable sense. I really kind of feel like one of the best beats on this album was Fuck It, I Don't Want You Back, which was the lead single. They definitely could have used more cityscaping kind of just more sense of city flash in that sort of tune as far as that song kind of conveyed. And I do also like the pep and day commerce pep of I Love Them Hoes, but there's just not a lot of that. I mean, I feel like some of these are just like East Coast kind of dreariness. There's just a lot of sleepy kind of vibes on here. And there's definitely some homeliness factors, something that just feels like it would be on Sunday television, something like that. It's really homely and house cleaning kind of music and songs like that, like On and I Want You So Bad and All Over Love are some ones that are some examples of that. And then there's just some awkward ones on here, like Something Strange and just some songs like some of those, like this My Baby's Lost and some of those type ones. It's just kind of the concept that a lot of these are just not that affable to listen to in terms of the marketing of what they're trying to do with like R&B. I feel like this doo-wop kind of sound works in certain senses when it's on songs like I feel like this doo-wop sound works when it's on songs like I Love Them Hoes that kind of have more marketability about it. But I just look after, there's just a lot of bops on here, a lot of tunes on here that just don't really have any real compelling nature about them. They just really feel like a lot duller versions of house cleaning music that just kind of don't have much. I mean, I think it's aiming for some degree of wholesomeness. It does kind of have more of like a whole packaging and just kind of being like a more centered person and that type of stuff. But this is not quite, it just doesn't really have that edge. I just feel like that's kind of the concept. This just really feels pedestrian and it barely feels marketable to be on like an album in stores. It's just kind of, the melodies are just kind of here and there. He definitely could have used, like I just kind of feel like this album just has like such an overall kind of looming pedestrian type feel about it that this is kind of too bad to kind of say that just because I just feel like the spark of like the 2 singles, Fuck It, I Don't Want You Back, and then I Love Them Hoes definitely have some good cityscaping and good East Coast kind of R&B type vibes about them, but you just don't get enough of approaches. Eamon could have definitely stood to have stepped out to a nightclub. I would have definitely said he could have used a few more guest rappers and had a few more bouncy productions on here that could have had a little bit more better sense of nightlife and some of that type feels. I definitely think that 7 songs out of 14 is pretty decent, but it's still kind of patchy as far as that kind of is concerned. So that's this kind of thing. So me liking 7 songs out of 14 on here, I'm going to give this album like a 5.5 out of 10. I feel like it's pretty solid. Definitely some good gems on here, but I kind of feel like for the most part, Eamon is basically seen as like a one-hit wonder, which is vastly disappointing, but there's just not, I mean, it's been 20 years. This is kind of the concept about it. He does have a second album, but that album didn't really chart at all either. It's really too bad that once again that I Love Them Hoes, the second single, just got completely kind of shafted and didn't really have a single solitary chance to chart. That's just kind of the concept. So there's really nothing on this album that has like the sheer marketability of the first single. And it's just kind of, I don't want to say it's glaringly obvious, but I don't want to say it's glaringly obvious, but it's obvious enough to be able to say that it's just kind of like, you know what you're coming here for. So it's just kind of the concept. But I found enough gems on here, and there's definitely some more gems to kind of fuck with. But it's just kind of the concept that you just have to have a little bit of a learning curve to plainer, kind of more makeshift and doo-wop oriented kind of R&B as far as that kind of goes. But it doesn't really have nightclub tunes on here, but it does have some cityscaping, so that's pretty good. So the social score as a result, I'm going to give the social score like, yeah, I'll give the social score like a 5.5 out of 10 also. I feel like it's middle of the road. It does have some gems on here like Low Rida, Fuck It, I Don't Want You Back, I Love Them Hoes, I'd Rather Fuck With You, Girl Act Right, some of those type ones, Get Off My Dick. There are some good ones that kind of have some of those concepts, but I just look after it. It's just kind of here and there as far as that's kind of concerned. It's just kind of questionable as to how it would be presentable to like your social circle as far as that kind of goes. Just kind of back and forth with it. But I look after it's just kind of middle of the road. It's just too bad that Amen just kind of had like a truncated kind of career as far as that kind of went because he had some label problems later on and stuff. I just would have to say he just really didn't get the chance to really get more hits out and just get some more radio kind of charting ones as far as that kind of went. But I look after it in terms of the future. Like there's only two other Amen albums, and both of which did not chart at all. So this is basically his biggest album, I would have to say. But maybe I'll review some of the other ones. But this does have some good stuff on here. It's just kind of it's pretty pedestrian, middle of the road type stuff. But I just would have to say it's got some gems in like a certain sense. But you just have to look for it and just realize that the single is probably the biggest moment, but that doesn't mean that the rest of the album is bad.